Thank you very much, everybody, for coming this morning. We'd like to welcome the mayor and his organization, particularly Midori Murikawa. Is that pronounced right? Yes. Yeah, it's easier to say Mayor Walsh for me than Midori Murikawa. But Midori runs the business strategy group, but the mayor's here to do two things. We'll run a format of asking some questions of Mayor and David with regards to the tech industry in Boston in particular and things that we're doing in Boston. And then we may have the opportunity for some questions at the end. So if we could just get started. First, the reason I'm doing this moderation is the average age here is 28, right? And so they thought, okay, how do we make the mayor comfortable in an environment where the average age is 28? We'll get the old Irish guy to interview him, right? So that's the only reason I'm here.
Do you work in security here?
Yeah. Probably. After this, I might be. Depends on the questions.
We'll talk later.
The other thing is today's a holiday. Does anybody know the unofficial holiday today? The company Success Org can't answer this, but does anybody else know? Positivity Day. Today is National Positivity Day. It's Positive Thinking Day.
No negative thoughts.
So it's Positive Thinking Day. And the reason that day came about, it came about a few years ago, is there's been various studies that say if you think positively, you're going to have better results and better efforts, right, with regards to things you're doing, whether it's in government, whether it's in work, whether it's in your lives, right? And there's also been other studies, there's one that Globe just published, that medically, people who think positively live longer lives, right? And accordingly, they created this day. And they created it because of the environment of today's world is filled with so much negativity, right? And the mind, as a result of seeing that negativity, starts to think in a negative way. So even if you are like in a positive person, because your mind is exposed to so much negativity, your mind is conditioned to think negatively. And so what they found is that over time, if you think positive, your mind can be reconditioned. So today's day was meant to focus on that, to recondition the mind. And so with that, I get to moderate this, as I said. And I was thinking of the questions that I'd ask the mayor, right? And I even started with a question of, okay, the first question would be, what can we improve in the city of Boston, right? But even that is negative, right? And then I asked some people in the hall, what should I ask them? Oh, can you ask them about the trash pickup on my street? Or the Molly wanted to know the security in West Roxbury. It's not. That's, oh my God. And so I thought, no, we're not going to do that, right? That we're going to, all the questions today are going to be positive questions, right? And so and the mayor, you see him on the news, right? He's always focused on, look, he's taking his jacket off now, he's getting ready. But he's always focused on answering negative questions, right? So today we're going to make it a positive day, right? And the objective is here for the mayor and his staff to leave thinking in a positive way, okay? And so anybody who, at the end, if we have time for questions, if anybody's got a negative question, save it for later, okay?
Or I'll give you a positive answer.
But I'd like to start, Mr. Mayor. Everybody here knows a lot about David. A lot of us know too much about David, to be honest.
Agreed.
But people here know about you from the press or the TV, right? And so I'd like to start with a little bit of a personal question. You've accomplished a lot to date, in your life and in the government and in the city of Boston. But it hasn't come without personal obstacles, right? And you've been very vocal about being a cancer survivor and a recovering alcoholic and from addiction. But so the question is, as you look at the qualities that you have as a person, what sort of had driven those are things that in people's lives, most people don't encounter either of those, and you've encountered two of those traumatic events in your lives. What sort of inner quality has driven you to achieve the success that you have?
First of all, thank you for having me here today. It's exciting to be here. And as I walked in, I couldn't help but notice everyone seems happy. and I'm sure not everyone's happy, and this is Positive Day, so you need to be happy. But it's amazing to see so much talent here in the city of Boston, working in basically the Copley area or downtown area. And so thank you. And I know that many of you, if I could just see a show of hands, how many of you are not from Massachusetts originally? Yeah, see, how many of you are not from Boston, not Boston or Massachusetts originally? How many from Boston? You're like 3 people from Boston, okay. We'll work on that. That is, and I'm going off script, I'll come back to the question in a second. My focus when I became mayor in 2014 was exactly the response to the first question, keeping young people here in the city of Boston. What was happening is, what's happened in the past is people get educated here, they had a good time going to college here, and then they'd go to New York, Silicon Valley, or wherever you went, and now Boston is a real option. I'll come back to that later. I think that the challenges you have as an individual shape you as you grow older, and it's what you do with those challenges as a human being on how you respond to them. So, for example, I had cancer at the age of 7, Burkitt's lymphoma. I was told, I wasn't told then, I found out later, that I probably should have died. The success rate of chemo radiation at the time was 30%. It's like 95% today. I didn't really think of it as a 7-year-old. You're not really thinking about dying. You just know you're sick and figuring it out, and you want to go play with your friends and stuff like that. And I couldn't do a lot of that stuff. But as I got older, I realized what I had, and it strengthened me as a human being. Getting into recovery, love drinking, love beer, love booze, loved it all, loved the feeling. But somewhere along the line, that feeling of loving it turned into almost having to have it to drown out emotion, to drown out feelings. Alcohol's a depressant. So when you're in a bad space, whether it's a breakup or you think your life is awful and you're not going in a good way and you're drinking, it's not going to make you feel good. That initial first 4, 5, 6 beers, if you drink that many, that buzz, you feel good on it, but then the buzz goes away and then you start to get depressed again. So alcoholism for me, it was kind of, first it was fun drinking, then it wasn't so much fun anymore, and then towards the end it was like disaster, blackouts, not knowing what's going on, ruining relationships, ruining everything going on. And going into recovery, I thought when I went to recovery, my first night in detox, I went in there and I didn't go there to really stop drinking. I went there to get the heat off me because, people were mad at me and everyone was upset with me. And I went in there, the first night I was in there, a group came in, Alcoholics Anonymous group, and they told their story. And one guy spoke, I don't know what he said, I forget what he said now, but I was like, whoa, wait a second. In my head, I got to really pay attention to what's going on here. And I grew up a Catholic, and I went to church every Sunday. I was an altar boy, all that stuff, but I never really had a relationship. So my counselor suggests I go in and say a prayer to somebody, anybody, grandparent, somebody. And I get down on my knees, and for the first time, I got honest with myself, and I asked a power greater than myself to help me with something. And the rest of the week, I was in detox. I listened. I listened to what was said. I took the suggestions. I learned about Yet for me is drugs, and I didn't do drugs. I didn't pop Oxycontin. I didn't shoot heroin. I didn't smoke weed. I didn't do coke. I didn't smoke crack. But I know if I kept drinking, that could be next. And I got out of there, and I started to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and lo and behold, life got better, day at a time. I was able to go back and apologize to the people that I hurt, something that takes a burden off your chest. Many of us here, those of you that aren't alcoholics, you ever fight somebody, and you might have fought somebody in college, and you still didn't talk to them since college because they pissed you off because something happened. And meanwhile, that's wearing on you more than it is on them. And you're like, I'm really pissed about it. And 30 years from now, you'll be talking, my roommate was awful. And it's about not necessarily forgiveness, but just getting off your chest. And that was part of the program. I think it's helped me be a person that I got into politics a year and a half after I got sober. I ran for state representative, and I won. And I was fortunate enough to get in the business because I wanted to help people. That's why I got in this, that's why I'm in this business. I want to help people. I love helping people. I love helping disadvantaged people. I love sticking up for people that are being picked on. I just love it. It's just like one of those things. I had a chance as a state representative to take some very, very controversial, difficult votes in death penalty in 1997 when I became the state rep. There was a big ballot bill whether to make the death penalty legal in Massachusetts, and it was for the first time I really had an issue that it was life and death that it could have been came down to one vote. I could have voted for the death penalty. It'd be the law today, and it made me really think. Kind of my first big grown-up moment. Although there was plenty of grown-up moments, but it was my big first grown-up moment. When marriage equality came around in 2004, it really wasn't that popular in my district. It really wasn't that popular. And when the Supreme Court of Massachusetts said that gay marriage is legal, a friend of mine who's a state rep reached out to me. She was gay, and she said, "I need your support. I need a white Irish Catholic straight guy to help me." And I said to myself, why would I not support gay marriage? It doesn't personally affect me, but it affects tens of thousands of people, and millions around the country, but we're dealing with Massachusetts. So my point, I guess the qualities, I don't know, not only talking about the qualities I have, but I love helping people. I love sticking up for people. I love making life better for people. All of those things that made me the person I am today, some of it came out of a negative experience. I know it's National Positivity Day, but you take a negative experience or you take a tough challenge and you turn it into action into a positive manner. And I think that that's something that's really important. I think for all of you here today, there's a lot of young people in the room. I think, I'm not telling you what you need to do. You're probably the smartest generation that we have had on this earth ever. But I also think that there's some of the stuff it's come in different ways, and I think you have to go back to the grassroots in some ways. I mean, I know we have the smartphones and all the information's right there at your hand, but as I look around the room, as I walked through and I saw the books on the shelf, don't be afraid to take a book off the shelf once in a while and read it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to talk to people who came before you and talk about what's going on. Don't be afraid to get back, and don't be afraid. A friend of mine told me this. He's a court officer. He was a former court officer, Italian. Two of the most powerful words in the American in the dictionary is "I'm sorry." Think about that for a minute. I'm sorry, and what that means is we all hurt each other all the time, and sometimes it takes the bigger person to apologize. And those words "I'm sorry" might not help the person you're saying it to, but for you and for me, it lifts off something out of my soul, I guess, or whatever it is that I feel better.
Cool. That's very good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that story. Let's turn a little bit to the city of Boston. And David, you weren't born here. You did come here. You have stayed here, right? And people know a lot about you, but I'm not sure they know the reasons of, hey, why have you come? Why have you stayed? Many entrepreneurs come, they make their money, and like the mayor said, they get back to California or they get back to where they came from. Talk a little bit about the basis of why you've stayed.
Yeah, I wasn't born here. I was born in the Bronx, New York, and then grew up in Queens, and then, came to Boston. Many adventures start. I think all adventures start for the same reason, right? I did this big adventures, whether it's discovering countries or sailing across the seas. It's because you followed a woman, right? And so this woman happened to be an Irish Catholic girl who grew up here, and so she wanted to move back, and that's how I got to Boston. And the first day that I was in Boston was the day that I moved here. I had never been to the city. Because I thought I was going to move back in 6 months to New York.
Well, she knew what you needed.
Yeah. They always do. Yeah, they always do. And so I came here, and the thing that stood out to me was a bunch of things. It was a pretty different time. It was almost 20 years ago now, so the city was pretty different than it is today. But things that stood out to me were obviously quality of life, community. From a technology standpoint, it was a better environment than I was in New York at the time, and New York City and Manhattan. And so the universities, the vibrancy, the engineering kind of culture really stood out to me, and I found it easier to build a business here and in Boston and continue to build businesses here than to build it in New York City or in California or somewhere else. And so I've stood here this whole time through 5 companies now, and that I've started because of that vibrancy and because it continues to get better, and the investment, it's almost unrecognizable even in the last 10 years, right?
Yeah, cool. Now, Mr. Mayor, a little bit like David, you and I also came here for women, right? The woman was our mothers, though, right? As opposed to our fiancés or our wives, right? So we don't have to go through that process. we also know why you stay, right? If you're the mayor of the city, like you stay, right, Boyd? I mean, if you were the mayor of something, would you go? No, right?
He's the mayor of Nantucket.
If I was the mayor of my, yeah.
That's the mayor of Nantucket, Mayor.
Yeah.
Right there.
If I was the mayor of my house, I would never leave my house, to be honest, right? So, but when you think about Boston and you're in an elevator and somebody says where you're from, I'm the mayor of Boston, and somebody looks at you like, we have sales guys that look outside at us sometimes with their head square like they don't know what we're talking about. But if somebody says, I never heard of Boston, like how do you describe the city?
I grew up here. My mother and father from Ireland, so I'm a son of immigrants. They came here in the 50s. Separately, they met here. I grew up in Dorchester, which is, everyone knows it, part of Boston. Went to grammar school, kindergarten at public school, grammar school at Catholic school, Newman Prep High School, which is on Marlborough Street. The name of it, the prep, was a prep school, but not like the type of prep school that probably most of you went to. I was a horrible student, went to Quincy College. After that, did notice I could do actually the work, transferred to Suffolk University, quit school because I wanted to work construction and make money. I wanted to be successful. Eventually, and the rest of the story is, we can get into it later. How do I describe Boston? Boston is a city of neighborhoods. It's still a city of neighborhoods. When I grew up, it was a very different neighborhood, Phil. Anyone live in Charlestown? All right, well, the Charlestown you're living in today is completely different than Charlestown it was 30 years ago. Anyone living in Southie? All right, the Southeast is completely different, Southie too. And then some of the other areas, they're all different, but those two areas I laugh because I'm watching people walking around with dogs and lattes and everything else. Like, that wasn't happening 25 years ago. So I've watched Boston transition, and Boston has been a city that has transitioned its whole life, if you will. Immigrants and different immigrants in different ways from different places, different power structures, the Brahmins and the Yankees and the Irish and the Italians, and now we have a lot of people of color moving into the areas of power, if you will, in the political spectrum and in the business world. Boston's identity, I think, in a lot of ways was a strong business community, but it was somewhat of a back office town. We did have some, we kind of took credit for like Bank of America, which wasn't Bank of America, it was Bank Boston at one point, and then it became Bay Bank, I think, and Bank of America, and it transitioned. Liberty Mutual, John Hancock Tower, that's kind of our pride of it. The way I would explain Boston today is I would start immediately by talking about the diversity of our city. I would talk about that 28% of the residents that live in our city are foreign-born. 50% of the residents of our city are people of color. 52% of the residents, the households in our city are led by women. I would talk about the strength of our diversity. I would talk about the strength of our universities and the ability to attract people to our city. I think that that's important. I would talk about the importance of the companies that are here today, but not forget the companies that have been here for 50 years, that have been the foundation for the company, of the city. I would talk about the diversity of the city. The common theme is the diversity. When you think about Boston, I think about diversity in whatever aspect, whether it's business, whether it's tech, whether it's hospitals, whether it's insurance companies, the financials world. I would talk about the diversity of the city of Boston. That's kind of how I talk about it. I would talk about, too, the uniqueness of the neighborhoods and how different they are, and the ability to get around the city fairly quickly, that you can go to East Boston, live in East Boston, and you can be on the waterfront if you choose, or you can live in, Maverick Square, where you're 2 blocks from the waterfront, but you live in a community, or you can get on a train and go across the city to Dorchester and see something very different. I think that that's kind of how I would try and sell Boston. When a company comes to Boston, and they're in my office, or I'm going to them, whether it's a company or a retailer, so every year there's this big convention in Vegas that is these companies, basically retail shops. They're fancy tea shops and fancy coffee shops and fancy ice cream shops. Apple's there, and all the big shops are there. Some golf shops. I go there and I talk about Boston, and I say, okay, your idea of a unique green type of tea coffee program could work in, and then talk about a specific area, give an explanation of the area, define the area for them, and talk about the opportunities they have. And generally, it always comes back to the young people, it comes back to talent. It comes back to the talent we have, because you're curious. You're curious. My generation, when I was 25 years old, We hung at, well, we didn't hang at the corner, but we hung in the neighborhood. We went to the bar down the street. We went to the restaurant over across the street. We stayed in the neighborhood. You guys are curious. You go and explore. And I think the fact that this exploration is a strength for our city today. I view Boston, when I became mayor, I view Boston as a sports team. And we're competing with other cities around America. We're competing to keep the talents because we have the talent. We're competing to bring the companies in here because we want them to come to the city. And we started to think about how do we do that. And I think in the last 5 years, in particular since I've been mayor, we've done a pretty good job because a show of hands, how many people in this room have been in the city within the last 5 years? Raise your hand. You think about that. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you were going somewhere else. And I know I'm not really answering the question you asked, and I'm trying to, but it's...
That's typical of all my questions.
Yeah.
They're used to that.
As a Bostonian, I just think, like, we're the best, you know?
Yeah.
We have Tom Brady. And the Eagles.
Yeah. Let's talk about economic development. You touched on it a little bit. The one thing, I've been in the tech industry 25, 30 years here, mainly based in Boston. The one thing that has been frustrating for me or for the industry is that we've lost some big ones, right? And you know, if Zuckerberg was at Facebook, he was at Harvard when he invented Facebook, right? If he had done Facebook in the city, I think this city would be not completely different, but a lot different, right? And there'd be a lot of we've created great opportunities, but I think there'd be even more economic opportunity in the city. And we lost other things like Elias and David know the guys from Dropbox, right? They were at MIT and went out there, right? We've seen West Coast companies come in and buy East Coast companies, right? And, you know, East Coast venture or East Coast entrepreneurs are known for the, hey, I'll make the, I won't run this game out long, right? I'll make the quick buck and then I'll get on, right? And I'll sell out, right? That's not our game here. To be honest, it wasn't the game we had at the last company that a lot of us were at. But what is the city doing to sort of not only, I don't want to ask a negative question since I started out positive, but what is the city doing to keep those kind of companies or attract those kind of environments?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important for us to let people know that we are open for business and that we want your business here. And I think that I'll touch upon Facebook in a second. When I first became the mayor, I asked a friend of mine who runs a venture capital fund to put a meeting together with VCs. And we sat in a room and we had a dinner down the street here at Capitol Grill. And I was going around the table, and these were VCs that invested in everything from Uber to Lyft to everything. And I said, give me the layout of the area of VC spending and how it works. And basically what they said was the VC spending in Massachusetts and in Boston, we give money to companies to start up and we let them go wherever they want. But the VC spending in California, in Silicon Valley, the money's given out in Silicon Valley and you're expected to stay in Silicon Valley. And I said, well, how do we change that image? And they started talking about how do we keep, their response was we have to attract talent here, and we have to think about keeping young people here, and we really have to create an ecosystem in the city of Boston that works for companies. And I left there, seriously, and at the time, my chief of staff was 27 years old, Dan Coe, and I started talking about it, because I'm like, Dan, you're a millennial, you have ideas, what do you think? And we started talking about what can we do for the perception of Boston, because a lot of it for you is perception. It turns into reality when you live here, but it's perception. Boston's cool, Boston's fun, great restaurants, great scene. We like it here, it's safe, you can walk around. So we thought about how do we use this as an opportunity to market more opportunities to keep young people here and to attract companies here. And since that time, I don't have the exact number on VC spending, but I can tell you VC spending for women companies is a huge success because the money's staying in the city of Boston. And women startup companies are coming here, investing here, starting here. WeWork comes in our front door. We start talking about WeWork expanding in Boston, opened up a space for them, a maker space. They did that, working with Mass Challenge. We created our own maker space within the Boland building, a City of Boston space. Again, more inlets to attracting young people and keeping young people here. It's ridiculous, but we changed laws. So if you, 5 years ago, if you wanted to have a glass of wine on an outdoor patio, you had to go in there and you had to order food to have a glass of wine or a beer on an outdoor patio. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, why do we have that law? What's that rule all about? And it was no reason for it. And we just made a simple change. Now, you didn't feel it, and you don't see it, and you don't even know what it's like. But 5 years ago, if you drank outside, you'd have to eat food. It just doesn't make sense to me. Again, it's just things, little subtle changes the approaches that you make here to attract people. We went for the Olympics in 2014. We went down to Redwood, California. We went in front of the USOC. I thought bringing the Olympics to Boston would have been the coolest thing ever. Other people had other ideas about, other thoughts about it, didn't happen. But when we were down in Redwood, California, we were presenting to the United States Olympic Committee, and then after that, we had like 4 hours of free time before they made a decision. And Dan Coe, my chief of staff, was there, and I'm like, what should we do? And he said, let's go to Facebook. I'm like, let's go. We jump in the car, we go to Facebook. Knock on the door. Is Mark home? Who's asking? The mayor of Boston and Dan Coe, chief of staff. But we saw the third person in line. He wasn't available. He wasn't on campus that day. And we got a tour of Facebook, and we got a tour of Instagram. And I said that day that if I were the mayor when you moved out of Boston, you'd still be in Boston. And I laid down the foundation, the importance of seeing companies like that grow and expand in the city because they're such a large employer. And I do that all the time when I go different places to talk to people, saying if you're looking to expand companies that might have been here or someplace, we want you to expand to to our place. I was out in Seattle, and I was at a startup out there, and their headquarters in Seattle. And I said, well, if you're looking to expand, I want you to come to Boston. GE. General Electric, I was in my office one day, actually before that, the head of real estate for GE happened to be in Boston. I met with him. At the time, he happened to be from Ireland, so we had a great connection. And I said, well, if you guys ever looking to expand, I want you to come to the city of Boston. Please look me up. A year and a half later, I'm in my office. I walk in, I see on the book, GE looking to leave Connecticut. What I do, I call the guy. He was no longer there. I call the person I knew and say, we're interested in GE coming to Boston. We're dead serious about it. That started a conversation. We had conversations. It was Boston versus New York. We got the entire political world and people in the educational world together, and we put on a presentation. And then when the time came, they chose Boston. Now, we know what's happened at GE since that time, but GE's been around for 100+ years. They're going to rebound at some point. But the point of it is GE's global headquarters is in the city of Boston. And what happened was companies started to say, I want to be in Boston. If GE moved to Boston, something must be going on. And it's not just the big companies. It's companies like this that when you started here, we talked downstairs, out in the hallway, 60 employees, I think 300 now, and however many more. You're here. So it's so important. So I guess the thing that's important is how do you, just like all of you, when you pick up a sweatshirt that has drift on it and you go out and you walk through the streets of Boston on it, people don't know what, most people, what's drift? You have an opportunity to market your company. You have an opportunity to market the work that you do as an individual. So what I do in the elevator is when I talk about being the mayor of Boston, I use that opportunity to market the city that I love, the city that I want to be, the most successful city in America. And I take whatever that opening is and run with it.
Cool. That's nice. David, following on that, right? The government, the city and the state can only do so many things, right? And one of the, I think, cool things about San Francisco is there's an infrastructure there, and the infrastructure are guys and gals that are CEOs like you and founders like you and Elias, right? What do you see as opportunity with regards to build that infrastructure? Because there's a bit of a community around that of how you can help one another out, right? And what are some of the venture guys doing, or what are some of you guys doing as executives and founders to help drive that?
Sure. I think, I would say that I've been trying to answer this question probably the last decade, since like mostly from the venture side, people on the venture side asking me. But I agree with the mayor a lot. I think, the Boston of 10 years ago, very different place. Boston of 5 years, very different place. And a lot of what we need to do is actually, from the infrastructure standpoint, it's pretty simple. It's marketing, which is to your point, and I think some of the stuff that you've been doing on livability, which I think those small, subtle changes we don't think about. We want these big paradigm changes, and it's those small things. Like, 5 years ago, you'd be wondering, where do you hang out here? Where do you go? Where are there people? Where can I find action? 5 years ago, the seaport didn't exist. right? Literally didn't exist. I mean, I just remember trucks being there for most of my time. You go there, now it's vibrant, and all the work that you've been doing there, it's vibrant, it's happening. People come in from out of town and see that, and they say this is a happening place. Or even small things like, you know, outside patio, how come I can't buy a beer on Sunday? Like all these small things like wear on you as a person coming in here. I know when I moved to Boston, it was all of these small little rules that didn't exist in New York that I didn't understand. And as if you're coming here as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, these things kind of wear on you, right? You didn't grow up with these things. So I think there's small things that we can do like that. Marketing is the #1 thing. And so I spend time at in Cambridge and at HBS kind of helping on that end, and then at Sloan as well, because I think those two schools are powerhouses. We have many more schools, but those are the ones that I spend time at. And I think they're probably super lousy, which I tell them at marketing. Right? They're not as good as marketing from a marketing standpoint as Stanford is in San Francisco. And a lot of things that have happened in Silicon Valley have to do with a lot of the marketing that Stanford and the business school has done there. And we've been poor at kind of trumpeting our own work here. And I like the work that the city is doing and that Mayor Walsh is doing now to actually market. Right? I think that was like a dirty word probably like 5-10 years ago in Boston. That wasn't a Boston trait to actually pump our chest, but we've won a lot of Super Bowls and a lot of rings now, and so I think we can pump our chest.
I like how you say we. Let me just, one point on HBS. I went over to HBS when I was a kid growing up. That I didn't even know what HBS was. Yeah. My family wasn't tied into the Harvard or business school. It wasn't an option. But when I became the mayor, my chief of staff, Dan Coe, was HBS. And I had a chance to go. I just watched the way he was prepared, and I looked at some fellows that we had in our office, or former HBS fellows that were in our office, and I'm thinking, wow, these kids, these people think differently. And I went over to HBS, and I sat in on a class, and they did a presentation for our team. And I was thinking about the way that they train somebody and to think differently and think critically and really do some amazing things. So afterwards, I asked the dean, can you find out for me what percentage of HBS grads stay in Boston? And so we did, 5%. So we went back to the office. I'm saying to Dan Coe, we let 95% of some of the best and brightest talented people come to our city or Harvard, next door in Cambridge. Well, actually, it's in Boston. And leave. And how can we do a better job of keeping that base of brain power in the city of Boston? And I think the colleges that you all go to, that want to here in Boston, those of you who came here to college and stayed, they're doing a better job. And companies are starting to realize now, we should go to Northeastern, we should go to Boston College, we go to BU, we should go to Harvard and try and recruit people here. But some of the higher level education stuff isn't necessarily happening, still not happening. And whether that's a marketing thing on HBS's point or my point, we have to do more of that. Because again, there's so many bright people in the world that we have to try and keep here in the city.
And I think a lot of it that I see, you know, on the campuses is marketing, because I talk to them about, I'm talking to them about options and where they should go, and they're talking about companies, and I mentioned local companies, and they're like, what's that? I didn't know, where is that? I didn't know that was here, right? And those are companies that are here. But for a long time, probably the last 20 years, those companies outside of Boston have done a better job at marketing to those students than we have, right?
No question about it. And again, it's not all about government. That's about work. That's a collaboration with business.
Yep.
And I shouldn't be out there marketing Boston by itself. I need to get CEOs and investors and people to say, wow, Boston is an option. Yeah. And I think today we're probably in a better position than we've ever been to really have this good, strong foundation about moving forward.
Great, great. Let's talk about, you talked on it earlier, culture and diversity, right? It's a big focus of us in the company. I think Drift is very unique in that both the two founders, David and Elias actually dressed up today. Usually he wears these cut-off jeans and stuff, but today he's dressed up. Not for me, but it must be for you, Mr. Mayor. But yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, I asked him to paint my cubicle yesterday because he looked like a painter. Yeah. But
he said he wouldn't qualify as a landscaper, but he had to work his way up.
But they're both underrepresented minorities, right? I think we are unique in the city of Boston that if we're not the only tech startup with two founders that are underrepresented, we are certainly the biggest and the most successful that are. And so a big part of our focus and their focus, and you can see it in the faces out here, is how do we become, Elias calls it the corporate face of America, right? We want to be the most diverse company in the city of Boston. And we just hired Dina Upton runs our people organization. She just hired a director of diversity and inclusion. We're got all sorts of internal efforts going on to do that. What are some of the things the city is doing? You alluded to them earlier, but some of the things the city is doing to help that inner city get into the tech industry.
I think, first of all, talk about who we are as a city and about our identity, and don't run away from it. And I mean by that is when I give you the breakdown of the city of Boston, it's a true breakdown. We have 700,000 people that live in Boston proper, 28% foreign born, 50% people of color, 52% households led by women, which means that the economic impacts are vital to having success in the different demographic areas I just talked about. We are very focused on pay equity for women. Not just talking about it and passing legislation. You know, I remember in '97 voting on a piece of legislation. Some of you probably weren't even born then, or you're in first grade, and we're fighting about pay equity in '97. We passed legislation that's going to solve it. And here we are, fast forward 22 years later, and a white woman gets paid, I think, 71 cents on the dollar to a white man. A black woman gets paid 63 cents to the dollar to a white man. And a Latino woman gets paid 51 cents on the dollar to a man. I mean, so we're not there yet. So we working with companies like Drift, and thank you for signing on to the Talent Compact, getting data anonymously from companies, 260 or 50 companies, 50 or 60 companies now, that are giving us data anonymously on pay, what they pay their employees. And we're looking at that and doing breakdowns to see where the pay equity still stands. Working to force companies, me as the mayor talking publicly, to force companies to make sure that women and Latinos and black people and Asian people are on your boards and part of your leadership teams and part of your hierarchy. Making sure that in my own administration, the city, that it reflects the city, because I can't go out and demand or expect companies to follow if we're not doing it. So looking at those different areas. Creating opportunities. One thing that all of you can do in this room, it might not help Drift today, but 10, 15 years from now, is mentor a young person. Find a young person in the city of Boston that needs mentorship and explain to them and help them through that. I think that those are key important things that you can do and take some of your free time if you haven't, even if it's an hour a week or 2 hours a week, just doing things like that. But I think that, you know, working with companies, having companies that's their mission to be the most diverse in Boston, and letting people know that's your mission so that you're challenging other companies to do the same thing. In private settings, don't be afraid to call people out. And call companies out and say, it doesn't appear that way. John Hancock, just for the first time in the history of the company, the CFO is a woman. You know, she worked her way through the company, did an incredible job, but I'm sure they said, it's time. It's time. And I think that a lot of those different places, a lot of those different things we have to do, we have to continue to move. You look at if you read the paper, you listen to the guys in the White House. I mean, the message is so negative all the time. That's not who we are.
This is positive day.
And I'm turning into it.
Yeah.
That's not who we are as a country.
Don't talk to Mr. Trump.
Even though it feels like it is, it's not who we are as a country. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, one person at a time, all of us in this room, to continue to reach out there and do what we need to do. It's great when you have the heads of a company willing to have that mission, but spread that mission to other companies. You are the ambassadors, not just of this company. You're the ambassadors of talking about diversity and inclusion. And when you're out at a bar and you bump into somebody that works at, you know, wherever they work at, you talk about what the philosophy of your company is. So they'll take that back to their company and say, you know, I was out at a bar the other night. We're talking to people over at Drift. This is what they're doing over there. We should be thinking about this too. And now we're getting more and more people in the conversation. You can't run away from it. One of the most difficult conversations to have is about racism. And when I became the mayor, it's a conversation I had more and more of. And when I was running for mayor, I would talk about racism as like, you know, we're working on racism in the city of Boston. We want to make sure there's no racism in the city of Boston. And, you know, we just kind of soften because we don't know how to talk about the issue. It's important to talk about the issue because it's a positive thing to talk about it. You're talking about a negative past, but you're talking about making a positive future, if you will.
Cool. David, a little bit, let's follow on that, on the topic of diversity and culture. you and Elias are doing a lot of stuff, right? And we're trying to do a lot of stuff as an individual company, right? We participate in the Team Build. We do the Hack Diversity. We're in the Mayor's City program, Summer Kids program. But how can we as a company, and maybe it's some of the things that Mayor talked about, but engage those other tech companies? Because it's almost, we can't win that battle by ourselves, right? It's too big a battle. But how can we engage other tech companies or other venture companies to help us do that?
I think we take two approaches. One is marketing, which we're good at, so we try to market what we're doing, and people around us and companies around us and venture funds around us see that. And the other is what the mayor said, which is to call people out, to hold them to task, to challenge them to do similar things. And for us, it's very important. It's Elias and I really focus on, and as a company, we are really two areas, which is, helping underrepresented minorities, which we are both of, and then helping single mothers, which we were both raised by single mothers. So those are two things that are not only professionally important, but personally important to us. And we started from early on this idea of this Drift Foundation, where we're going to pour our energy into those areas, and specifically into taking an approach that is a generational approach, because this, as you mentioned, is not a simple thing. This is not a hashtag. This is not a quick fix kind of thing. This is going to take a generation, multiple generations. So we invest mostly in kids, right? In both of those areas, kids who are being raised by single moms or kids who are underrepresented minorities, to bring them into STEM and tech. And whether it's in elementary school, junior high, high school, versus just focusing on, college and people just about to graduate, because those people have already self-selected into those programs by then. You really have to go back to the earlier and younger people. And, that's a big mission and hard to sell, because everyone wants a quick fix, but we need to take this kind of generational approach.
I also think, Mr. Mayor, that the way the city has changed over even the last 5 or 6 years creates more of an opportunity for companies to do that. Because I'll take the last company I was at, our headquarters was out in Woburn, Massachusetts, and we were also big into how do we create a diverse population here. And we had an idea of, okay, let's get a bus, and we were in an industrial. There were 5 or 6 other tech companies there. We were in the mode of hey, rent a bus for the summer. Let's have somebody drive that bus, pick these kids up in the city of Boston, and drive them out to Woburn, Massachusetts, to get them into the tech industry. But the hurdles in which to do that, were too much, right? And so to get into the burbia. But now what's happened is, with these companies coming into the city, right, these kids can, get on a bus themselves and show up in the Seaport, get on the subway and show up here in Copley Square, where 5, 6 years ago, you did not have that kind of tech industry here. So I think it creates more an avenue and an easier avenue for us to achieve some of those goals.
And you also got to find the kids. I mean, my father was a construction worker. I was a construction worker. I wanted to wear a suit and tie and get business cards. I don't know what that meant, but I knew back then that's what I wanted to do. Obstacles and challenges came up that threw me off the path. I eventually got back on path. I got the office. I got the business cards. I got the job I wanted to do. And it's almost like you need to experience. And the reason I saw my uncle work in an office. I saw him wear a tie. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I saw him representing people. I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. And that kind of gave me incentive to kind of push myself to become something. Nothing wrong with construction workers. They're great. I love them. They build these buildings and they knock them down. They build them back up again. but it's like giving people an experience. There's so many young kids in urban America today that have no idea what tech means. They have no idea what startups means. They have no idea what an opportunity means. Some of you probably, when you went to college, your first year in college, you had no idea what a tech startup was, and all of a sudden you stumbled across it over the next couple of years because the industry kind of blew up. How do we expose young people to positive situations? How do we expose them to positive experiences? And that's why I think it's so important that for all of you, some of you, most of you, whoever wants to mentor young people and give them the opportunity, because some kids have grown up in generational poverty. And it's not their fault, and it's not their parents' fault, and it's not their grandparents' fault, and it's not their great-grandparents' fault. It's just that's just what's happened. And I think that there is a chance. There is probably somebody in this room that can go back and say, I grew up in generational poverty. My mother was poor, my grandmother was poor, my great-grandmother was poor, but now I'm here, I have a real opportunity. And that's just by getting somebody opening a door a little bit and letting somebody experience something. That's also key.
Cool.
Yeah, I love that answer because I think modeling is so important, right? Being able to see this and see this happen. So many people that I talk to about, including myself, about how did you get into what you're doing, it was happenstance, just like that. You had an uncle, you had a job, you saw someone one day and you're like, oh, what is that? I can do that, right? I didn't know what I was gonna do. I knew I wanted to have a business card just like you, but I didn't know what business meant, right? Entrepreneurism wasn't a word until recently that I knew, right? Although, and so I didn't know any of that, and I wanted to model. And then my mom's dream was that I wear a suit, but I failed that that dream, right?
And it's usually our parents' dream.
Yeah.
They didn't want me wearing construction. They wanted me wearing a suit and a tie. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. We'll put a suit and tie on every day.
Yeah.
Now I want to wear ripped jeans and t-shirt.
Totally, like Elias. Yeah.
How about you may have seen it as you walked around here, but Elias and David have created a culture. We call it a culture of learning, right? And you see it in the books around here. And the strategy is, look, we don't have to invent everything. That there are a lot of great companies that have gone before us that have invented things, right? Whether it be Amazon, whether it be Walmart, whether it be Home Depot. And I wouldn't say we study them, but we emulate them in some ways, right? As you look out into, your profession, is there a city in America where you also learned from? And do you have that concept or that strategy?
I think as a leader or as a city, you always have to learn and evolve. And I think that there's not one city that I look at and say, oh my God, I love everything that they're doing over here. You take bits and pieces from everywhere, and you incorporate them into the government. You incorporate them into society. Even as an individual, I was watching last night a clip on YouTube. My brother sent to me of Lou Holtz giving a speech at a graduation. I don't know if anyone's looked it up. Just look it up. And
Tremendous speech.
It's so
Tremendous.
inspiring.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I got to remember every single word he said and just repeat this when I talk to them because he was just amazing. And I realized that I can't do that.
Yeah.
But what I can do is take bits and pieces of his message and incorporate, first of all, in my life that I believe in what he's saying, and then pass that message along to someone else. And I think that part of that is by experiencing. So, for example, we have what's called the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and we meet twice a year, basically. Once on a June meeting. 2 years ago, it was in Boston. This year, unfortunately, it was a horrible place we had to have the meeting. It was in Hawaii. And, and we go to D.C., and what we do is we share best practices, and we talk about situations. So, so when I'm watching TV, and I see riots happening in Baltimore, and I see the mayor of Baltimore standing at a podium by herself, I call her up, and I say to her, you need to put some people around you. You need to take a deep breath. You need to get ahead of the situation, and you need to work forward. And how did I know that? I knew that by listening to somebody else telling me the story. So sometimes I offer advice to other cities, or I'll call Michael Nutter when he was the mayor of Philly and say, listen, I'm dealing with some issues around race in Boston. As an African-American mayor of a major city, can you give me some advice on maybe how to handle this thing? On complicated issues, and we share best practices, if you will. I don't think you don't want to just. I don't want to just copy one city, because then we become that city, and it's like you want your own identity, just like your company. You don't want to say everything Home Depot does we're going to do because it's great, and you're just Home Depot, and you want to be Drift, and I want to be Boston, and it's important for us to think about how do we improve it.
David, you want to follow on that? Because, while we've talked about the story a lot to employees, we do have a lot of new employees here, right? But the whole idea of why you guys adopted that and the strategy around...
I think part of it is similar to the mayor. It's kind of experience or age will teach you that the bits and pieces are there, right? You just have to be smart enough to look for the right bits and pieces and assemble them. And I think too early in life you get... and I don't know, for me, it seemed like in school I was taught to just like that would be cheating, right? That was cheating, plagiarism, that you don't want to copy, that you had to be wholesale original, at least back in my day. And I think that's a poor lesson to teach, right? Like the patterns are there because they're human patterns, right? That's why they repeat. And so I'd say the first half of my career, I didn't do that. I didn't look for the bits and pieces. I learned only one way, through pain, aka brute force, right? So I learned everything the hard way myself, and then switched over time. Some would call that wisdom, or maybe I didn't want the pain anymore, and started to learn bits and pieces from those who came before us, and you start to see history repeats. It repeats in different ways, but that the lessons are there because they are human lessons. They are not business lessons. They are not civic lessons. They are human lessons. They are personal lessons, and because we are humans at the end of the day, and we act in certain ways. And so for us, it's become very important to learn from others and emulate, and to look back in history and to build upon those shoulders of those people that have come before us.
Cool. Final question, then we'll probably have time to take a couple from the audience. But we have, Mr. Mayor, we have roughly 240 employees here. I think I told you on the way in, average age is 28. Myself certainly takes that dramatically up, and Paul, the auditor over there, also takes that up dramatically. But other than that, it's a very young population. As you saw, it's a lot of people that live in the city too. How can they're young, they're passionate, they're smart, most of them anyway. How can they help? How can they help you? How can they help the city? How can they help you guys and gals accomplish what you guys want to do?
First of all, be happy what you do every day. Honestly, you want to love and be passionate about your job. That's number one. I think that working for a company or working for government, if you're disgruntled or not happy, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're not helping the company. I think number one, that's one thing I do. Number two, don't be afraid to get back. What does that mean? That means get involved in your civic association. That means get involved in mentoring somebody. That means get involved in something. Just you are part of Boston's fabric now. Now, whether or not you're here 25 years from now, you might be, some of you might be, some of you might not be, but be part of this community, because this is a special community, and be active out there. I think that's an important aspect of it. You know, if this is completely off topic a little bit, but when I talked about being alcoholic, if you're out here and you're struggling, ask somebody for help. Just don't, because what happens is that'll save you a lot of pain in you and your family. If you don't have a family, your future family down the road, just reach out your hand and talk to somebody. I think that's important. Don't be afraid to say I'm sorry. And don't be afraid to offer help to people. I think those are just basic. It's like a parent now. I don't mean to, but those are all things that as you're old enough now to realize. There's no really young people. What's he talking about? You know what I'm talking about. Push government. Vote. Get active. Have your voices heard. You know, let people know. Don't think that your vote doesn't count. Your vote absolutely counts. I don't know how many people are registered to vote here. If you want to raise your hand, how many registered to vote here? Okay, and I'm not going to ask you how many people vote, because most hands won't go up. You're going to say, well, I voted against Trump in 2016. Yeah, well, that's one presidential election. There's a city council race now. You need to get active in society. That's important. You know, these are all things that I would suggest you do, and there's so much more I'd suggest you do. But I just think just be honest to yourself. I worked for the laborers union. I was in an office. I had a tie on. I made a pretty good check back in 1996 after I got sober. I had a car. I had a gas card. Didn't pay for my insurance. It was pretty cool, pretty sweet gig at the time. I was miserable, because I didn't want to be there, because I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something that was fulfilling to me. When the state representative who was in my area decided not to run again, it was October of '96. I went home, told my mother and father, I said, I'm running for state representative. My father was very happy that I had a good job and consistent job and pension, all this stuff. He said, I think you're making a mistake. My mother said, I don't want you to run. My uncle came over, who ran the union at the time, said, you're making a big mistake. And I said, no, I want to do this. And I ran, and I got elected, and I got paid less. And for 16 years, I was happy. In 2011, I was a state representative, and I had the opportunity to take over the building trades. And I did. So I was a state rep and ran the building trades in Boston. I made a lot more money. First time in my life that I had actually 2 checks that I uncashed. And 2 years later, the mayor decided not to run again. And I was saying, okay, I could make $250,000, $300,000 a year combined over here with an incredible pension, work for 20 years, retire, make more money, retire because I have a pension from the laborers, a pension from the building trades, a pension from the state, and I'm happy. But you know something? I'd be miserable. I wanted to be mayor, so I ran for mayor. And I think that you follow what's in your heart. You follow the dream that's in your heart. That's the message I have for the young people in this room. Follow that heart, because that heart will take you where you want to go. If these two guys didn't do what they did, they didn't follow their heart, they wouldn't be sitting here as CEO. They might be working for a startup company, but they took a gamble. And that gamble, I wouldn't say necessarily paid off. It's not, life isn't over yet, but it's something changing. You're changing the culture of the city of Boston. So that's what I would do.
Cool. All right, we got time for 2 questions, 2 or 3 questions.
You can ask whatever you want. I know there's a couple planter questions, so you can ask if you want. But yeah, I'm going to be fast in my answer. I'm not going to ramble. I'm a politician right now. I got to shorten my answers.
Ayala, the CEO of the Build program, was here, and she's looking for a team of drifters to help mentor kids at the high schools. So we need one. Raise your hand right now. We need pictures. Who's going to help us mentor? The mayor is saying here that he wants you guys to mentor.
Well, I'm glad I did it, because 4 hands went up first.
Okay, good. Perfect. So please get back to Dina and get to Ayala. We need to be helping the kids in, here in the city and bring them into the office here. Thank you.
All right, other questions?
Any questions? Somebody must have something.
Here, this kid in the front row, this is a very smart kid. Yeah. Very smart. His father's even smarter. Yeah, his father's even smarter.
Thanks, Dad. I assume, obviously, you have role models across business, politics. I'm curious, is there any, in terms of public service or public servants, politicians, is there any present or past politicians, public service people that you have admired and kind of have been a role model for you?
One was my former Congressman, Joe Moakley. He was a guy in Southie. He was the number 3 ranking when he died in Congress. He was a state representative, a state senator, a city councilor, and everyone just liked him. And he had a nice way to him. He listened to everybody, and he was progressive back in the day when progressive wasn't popular. And I kind of just there's an institute named over at Suffolk University for him. You know, he wasn't Tip O'Neill and Ted Kennedy, but he did his own powerful change agent, and he's kind of a guy that I often talk about emulating. Congressman Joe Moakley.
Cool. Other questions?
Yell it out. Public transit system. Well, first of all,
is that a positive question?
That's a positive question. Because the train colors are beautiful. The red, blue, orange, yellow, green. No yellow. I forget what color it is. The public transportation system is complicated because it's not run by the city, it's run by the state, so we collectively work together on it. One of the challenges that we have in Boston and Chicago has, not Chicago, we have, New York has, Washington has, we have an infrastructure that needs improvement. One thing about your generation and tech companies is you're constantly evolving and changing. One thing about public transportation is we built a system 125 years ago, and we didn't change it at all, except for maybe the colors of the train. So a couple quick things. Number one is governor's committed $8 billion investment in public transportation, meaning upgrading signals, upgrading tracks, buying new cars. That needs to happen. I think the state also has to start thinking about more energy efficient ways of transportation. We have to think about electrifying the entire fleet. We still use diesel. We need to get away from that. The city of Boston, we're working on plans. We have a program called Vision Zero for 0 fatalities of people on bikes and pedestrians walking across the street. We're building more dedicated bike lanes. We're having better bicycle connections, better pedestrian connections, trying to get people out of their car, trying to get people to slow down. So that's I could probably spend an hour on it. But the bottom line is, the changes are coming. My response to you is everyone has a Twitter handle. Tweet out, you know, we need to fix the T. We want to be supportive. We need to fix now because we need to know that. As a mayor, my fear with public transportation is we're growing at such a big clip We have 120,000 new people working in Boston that weren't working here 5 years ago. My concern is someday I'm going to be sitting across from a company and they're going to say, we really want to move whatever company, X company, to the city of Boston. We want to put our global world headquarters in your city, and we want to bring 1,000 employees, but we're worried about the train system. The last thing I want to do is lose a company because the red line broke down or derailed. We have to do better than that.
Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I got a mic before the last question. I didn't just have it the whole time. So my question is, so you guys have talked a lot about generations and different, and I really thank you guys for calling us a smart generation. I think we are too. But how is our generation and other generations that are here, that work here, how are we the same, and why is that good?
That's a great question. I could give the answer that we're all Americans and we love our country. I could give the answer we're all from, Bostonians love Boston. I think because we're human beings. We're human beings, and I think that the fact that, there's different circumstances for different periods of people, and I think that educational learning is different today than it was, say, when I was going to school. And certainly different than when my parents were going to school. But I think that we're all human beings. I think at the core of most of us, all of us, we want to do good. And I think whatever that is. And I think we adapt with the change in time. For example, when I was growing up, the generation before me is like, oh man, I remember the days when you could walk down the store and there was no problems in the street. It was great. Wasn't it wonderful? It was great. And then my generation, as we got older, saying, oh my God, this generation today is different than our generation. When we were kids, it's like we think the next generation is different when in fact we're really kind of the same. We might dress differently in different phases, and we might look differently in different phases, and we might talk more openly. I think the biggest difference is today it's okay to talk more openly, meaning that social issues, gay marriage is accepted. If you're transgender, it's accepted. It's accepted. It's okay to talk. It's okay not to talk about these issues, but it's okay for most people to feel more comfortable with who they are. But I think we're pretty much the same at the core and the heart.
I think we want to make it better, right? And you kids want to make it better for your kids, and my parents wanted to make it better for me, and I want to make it better for my kids, right? And so we as Americans are in the mode of we want to make things better, right? And not just within our family core, but within society, right? That the theory is you leave the world a better place than when you came into it, right? And I think we all strive for that. And you can go back 10 generations, right? And I think that mindset in the human mind is there.
Yeah. I also think you have to, and it's in some of these books probably, if it's not, somebody should write it. Things come faster today to you guys. Meaning if you want if you want the newest pair of sneakers, it's like, okay, again, they're on the way to the house right now. I take out the phone, click it down, and there it is. And I think that you have to start thinking about that too. In the last generation, listen, I had a credit card. It's like, if I want something, I go to the mall or go to the store and buy it in 2 days. And I think that's one of the differences, but we still have that, sometimes that compulsiveness. And I think that sometimes it's how do you learn not to have that? But I don't think there's a lot of difference other than I do think your generation certainly has a lot more access to knowledge than my generation did. I was at my mother's house the other day. I went down the cellar and I saw the encyclopedias and I laughed. I took out the encyclopedia. I remember doing a project on Upper Volta, which used to be a country in Africa. And I'm thinking today you Google, what's Upper Volta? You Google it, it'll tell you it used to be a country. It took me like 7 weeks to figure it out in the encyclopedia. It takes 7 seconds today to ask Siri, right? Siri, tell me what Upper Volta is. So, any other questions? Yeah. I got like 3 more minutes. I have to go on the radio.
Yeah, this is the last question. This guy asks the most questions of anybody in the company. Yeah, and it can be long.
I didn't need that. Only you. Yeah. I feel like the way you talk, you speak about how the Boston tech community and Boston grows together. It's not like an us versus them type thing. Yeah. Whereas in San Francisco, I feel like it's very they're at odds with each other a lot. And even New York, a great example is the Amazon situation with Queens, where people were opposed to it, even though it was going to bring jobs. And I'm curious how you prevent that from happening in Boston, like how you think about it.
I go in rooms that are completely opposite of yours who don't want development. You just gotta tell Boston's story. I gotta tell the story of Boston. I mean, use the Olympic thing. I mean, as soon as, first of all, when Boston we went out to Redwood, California. We were going up against LA for the Olympics. LA had hosted them in 1964, I think, or 84. They were going to get the Olympics. We won in, put on a presentation. And later that day, or a couple weeks later, we get a phone call. They're going to host, we got offered the 2024 Olympics. It was like the happiest moment for me. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm from Boston. I grew up here. Like, who would have ever thought that Boston could potentially host an Olympics? Like, that doesn't happen here. That happens in LA and happens in England and happens in maybe New York, but it doesn't happen here. And what we weren't prepared for is the next day, the questions and the concerns of the Olympics and all the chatter. And I learned early on that I need to be better prepared for when those questions come. So when we went for GE, we were preparing for the questions of not welcome, we got GE, that's the greatest thing in the world. I was concerned about how much money did you give them? Did you give them money? Did they get incentives? What's the incentives? What's it going to cost the city? It's like today, in a lot of ways, and I don't mean to sound this, but the media is like, it's not, you don't read you don't pick up the paper that often or pull up an app and see a story. Oh, Mayor Walsh saved 55 people today. It's about there's always a spin on it. And I think that as a mayor, I feel that I'm the chief executive, if you will, of the city of Boston, that I look at the city and I think the future growth of the city is incumbent upon having a diverse group of businesses in the city of Boston. And as I see the tech sector grow, I want to see that tech sector grow in the city of Boston and in the region of this area. We're the sneaker shoe capital, if you will. People don't pay attention to it, but Ngemi is Boston. New Balance is Boston. Converse is headquarters in Boston. We have ASICS in Boston. We have, there's an Reebok in Boston. There's a lot of companies here. So it's how do you promote those different companies? The people that are naysayers, I think the naysayers is, my God, the housing prices we're being pushed out because there's this young couple next door that bought this house. They paid $1 million for the house. Those are the things I have to push back on to create more housing. But I just don't let the naysayers take over. Boston, as much as Boston's changing, Boston's still Boston, meaning that there's still generational people that live here that grew up and say, I grew up in Dorchester and my parents grew up in Dorchester, and my grandparents grew up in Dorchester, so we still have that as well. The people that are here generational. But if we want to stay competitive in the innovation economy, and we want to stay competitive in the world, Boston needs to continue to stay competitive. Because there are cities in America today that are small little cities. Use Austin, Texas. I don't know much about Austin. I know the mayor, great guy, Steve Adler. I don't think Austin 30 years ago was known as a hub of innovation. But Steve Adler is making some huge moves down in Austin, and he's like coming on strong. Because when you talked about Texas in the past, you talk about Dallas. You talk about maybe Houston, San Antonio. Now all of a sudden, Austin's making this big rush. Why? Because you want to get talent and young people and growth in the city. And I think that there's other cities out there that have the ability to really take off to the next level, and I want Boston to be on in that stage. Again, it's about competition, and what does that do for that helps. We are the hub of the Northeast of the country, meaning New York is below us, from Boston up. So we're basically, I view us as the capital of New England, and it's so important for a successful Boston, because if it's not successful, our social programs get hurt. The people that need us get hurt. We don't have the ability to help people that need help. And that's kind of what I think we have to do. I don't know if that answers your question.
Cool.
But
That's good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Mayor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.